Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Donald Trump's feud with the media got even weirder and more intense over the weekend after the president tweeted a video of his staged brawl with wrestling mogul Vince McMahon with his CNN logo superimposed over McMahon's face. It was a little confusing since CNN and pro wrestling could not be more different. One is an entertainment venture that promotes over-the-top fictional narratives and rigs its fights. The other is the WWE, but whatever. There is a word for this. It's called trolling, the digital version of getting someone's goat. Should the president really be taking time from running the free world to drive the media insane? Maybe not. Probably not. But he obviously enjoys it quite a bit. Here's the response he got, all of which you could have predicted ahead of time.
He's sending a message that this kind of violence is okay and that the media are an okay target for violence.
It is an incitement to violence. He is going to get somebody killed in the media. There's way too many unstable people out in the streets right now at this time of impassioned and heightened passions.
There are people out there who will, unhinged, irrational, who take these messages, internalize them, and may act on them.
Well, CNN's media critic Brian Stelter argued that the video is so offensive that we ought to suspend free expression and censor the president's speech, at least on social media. It's a kind of an odd argument for a journalist to make, but there you have it.
So he is talking about violence against CNN. He's not saying go out and beat someone up, but he's publishing this video that models the behavior. I asked Twitter PR about an hour ago, what is this? Is this a violation of Twitter's terms of service? We have reporters asking that question. We've not heard back from Twitter. But keep in mind, the terms of service, they do forbid incitement to violence or harassment.
Well, there's no defending it on taste grounds, but dangerous? You heard a similar line on television all weekend. The president's words are putting lives in danger. Okay, but you wonder if reporters apply the same standards when those lives don't belong to journalists. Are they quite as upset as they are now? Do you remember when Bradley Manning dumped 750,000 pages of secret U.S. government documents into the media bloodstream? That happened. Did anyone get hurt because of that? We're still waiting for the follow-up stories on that. There doesn't seem to be a ton of interest in newsrooms. Or how about a month ago when the press published leaks about the Manchester bomber that infuriated intelligence in the UK? Did that hamper British counter-terrorism efforts? We may never know because so few reporters care. It was not about them. So it's not that interesting. Tammy Bruce is a radio show host, and she joins us now. Tammy, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I should preface this by saying the obvious. I'm not in favor of this. Haven't been in favor of it since day one. Probably should shut down the Twitter account, in my view. On the other hand, the response is so disproportionate, but in a very specific way. This is dangerous to us. That is what people safely ensconced in Washington TV studios are telling us. Is it dangerous to them?
It's not, only if they're successful in shutting down the president's ability to tweet and to activate in this manner. When you mention about what's dangerous and what the press does, and you gave some really good examples, but also just last month, the New York Times revealed the CIA's covert operating agent in Iran for the CIA and our operations there. They named him, they discussed his role, and even his alleged role in the killing of an Iranian-backed Hezbollah operative as well. So that puts that individual directly in danger, let alone all of the individuals who may have been working with him. So they don't have a problem doing that when there's real direct damage. But in this case, I happen to like the Twitter feed. I think the wrestling tweet was brilliant, and let me tell you why. It really brought up, it was predictable, as you noted in your opening, a predictable response. And isn't it interesting that that response, in fact, proves Donald Trump's point about the media, that they focus on the absurd, that they can't be taken seriously, they themselves don't take their job seriously, and it reinforces his point that they're increasingly irrelevant and they can't be trusted because they're not bringing people the real news. Now, when you look at his Twitter feed, and there's even been some complaints about this recently, they've actually begun counting his tweets and checking out the percentage of what's on policy versus what's on complaining about the media, and there is very little policy which tells you that there's a specific reason for the Twitter feed, which is to push back on these issues as he governs on serious issues like foreign policy, talking with China, dealing with North Korea, shooting at ISIS again, killing them, the little kid in England. Sometimes Twitter serves a purpose in that regard, but I think it's brilliant. It reinforces his point about the media, and they fall right into the trap because they're caught up in their own loathing. They can't see past themselves.
So the point of these tweets is to make reporters' heads explode and allow them to discredit themselves?
Well, that's what I'm seeing happen right here. Now, when you think about how much time it takes, whether, again, he's tweeting, he should be working, how long does it take? You have a Twitter account. It's fabulous. I do, too. It takes about a half of a second to push that button. He does that. They then move on, and he continues to do his work, dealing with the G20 that's coming up, the nature of the health care bill, the tax reform. And by a simple push of a button, he spins them around so quickly. Of course, it tells the American public that the media is so consumed and locked in groupthink that even they don't realize what's going on. And a recent poll, actually, just from today, notes that, I think it was an NBC Marist poll, that the media's polling numbers are at 30%. 30% of Americans trust them. 37% trust the president. So his rating is higher, and the American people trust him more than the media. And I think that tells you how this fight is going at this point.
That is fascinating. I mean, that's a really interesting analysis. I would say, for the record, I treat my social media like a loaded gun. I don't have the self-control for that stuff, so I stay away from it.
But it's
Tammy,
very,
I'm glad
very
you're
delineated,
on it,
and I think it's smart, and people have to look past themselves to see the nature of what's occurring here. I think it's great.
Fascinating. The great Tammy Bruce. Thanks a lot.
Tucker.
Well, as we just said, the president's Twitter feed has so dominated the news for the last week that you'd think nothing else is going on, but a lot else is going on. Last week, for example, the U.S. House voted to crack down on illegal immigrants and the cities that shelter them, two major legislative priorities of the president. Coverage of those votes has been scant, to say the least, and maybe that was the point. In any case, to bring you up to speed, we are joined now by Stephen Camarata. He's the Director of Research for the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington. Stephen, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. So what have we missed as we've been watching the tweets and the CNN response and reporters losing control of themselves on TV? It's hilarious. What else has been going on the immigration front?
Well, there has been real progress. Not only have we seen a big step up in arrests and enforcement, but the House passed two moderately important bills. The sanctuary bill, which is the more important of the two, which helps to withhold funds from cities that don't cooperate with immigration authorities, even when they have someone in jail, and also clarifies some things in the law. The cities, it's a complex legal thing, but the cities say they don't really have to hold people who are in their jails when the Immigration Service asks them to do. This bill clarifies that, oh, yes, they do, though, in my opinion, the law was already clear. And the other thing is called Kate's Law, which, when someone has previously been deported, being in the United States is a felony. This clarifies some things and raises the penalty. So hopefully people who re-enter the United States after deportation will be clamped down on. So that's the idea.
So both of these seem an extension both of common sense but also of existing current law. I mean, this is not radical new territory.
No, it's not.
Ground that's being plowed here. How hard will it get these from the bill stage to become law?
Yeah, it's got to make it through the Senate. And the Democrats basically take the position that even when someone is in jail and is illegally in the country and the Immigration Service says, well, look, you've arrested them, we ask you to hold them for 24 hours, they say no, they're going to release them. It seems like this is a great opportunity for the Republicans and the president to beat up on the Democrats, because only the most radical person would say, no, that person shouldn't be made to leave the country. The only people who object are people who just object to immigration enforcement, basically. So I think it's a great opportunity for the president, but you're right, this really isn't very radical. It just seems like common sense.
So are there Republicans in the Senate, do you think, willing to publicly oppose these bills?
Yeah, it's not clear. I'm guessing the ones who might be most likely might be Flake from Arizona, but I think he would go along. McCain, Lindsey Graham. These are the ones who might. So,
Right.
But I think they'll mostly go along. It's really they need like 8 Democrats or 7 Democrats.
It seems like it would be a great debate to have, both for the Republicans in the Congress, for the White House, but really for the country. I mean, what is your position, I guess you would ask someone opposed to this, that people here illegally have a moral and legal right to be here? Then why aren't you agitating to change the law and just to open up the borders legally? Like, you could really press people to explain their positions, which won't stand the scrutiny of light. I mean, they'll melt if they have to explain this stuff, because it's too crazy.
Right. I completely agree. Who can object? Remember, we're talking mostly this comes into play when someone has been arrested and is in jail, and the immigration authorities say, hey, hold on to that person, we're coming down to get them, and they get released by the jail as a matter of policy, even though the person's been identified as illegally in the country. And actually, in fairness, you know, they've actually published lists of all the crimes that the people who've previously been released by these sanctuary jurisdictions have committed, and it's serious, sex offenses, robbery, and so forth, and yet they're still doing it. And I think partly is because the Republicans can't seem to articulate this, which isn't very hard, but for whatever reason, it's not a fight they seem very anxious to have, even though it seems like it would be one easy to win.
Because they don't believe it. Because in the end, a lot of them are guilty liberals, and they're pretending otherwise, and this would force them out of the shadows into the light. I hope we have that debate. Stephen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, voters in the city of Houston successfully campaigned to stop a public housing project there. The New York Times is, of course, furious, so they're suggesting it's time for democracy to be put aside for the sake of diversity. That's next. Also, the governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, did not go swimming this weekend, but he's still in hot water for relaxing on a public beach after closing it to everybody else. We've got the full details on that story just ahead. Well, the New York Times ran a piece this weekend attacking homeowners for the sin of wanting some control over their own neighborhoods. The article focused on Houston, where residents successfully petitioned their city to block the construction of a large publicly funded low-income apartment block. Now, policymakers love low-income housing. It makes them feel virtuous, like nothing else, like they're doing something good, even if they aren't. Landlords, of course, love it too because it makes them rich. People who are forced to live nearby, however, have a very different view. Government housing almost never makes your neighborhood better, which is why affluent liberals like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama live nowhere near it and never will. Crime tends to increase along with drugs and signs of decay. It's tough on local schools, too. Residential property values often fall significantly. Now, none of this is an attack on people who live in public housing, of course. Most of them probably don't want to be there either. But there's no use in lying about it. Housing projects hurt neighborhoods in a bunch of ways, and there's nothing immoral about saying it. It's just true. And if it was your neighborhood, a place you'd worked hard to move to so your family could have a better life, you'd probably say it too, no matter what color you are. Again, you don't see Obama living next to the projects. Maxine Waters lives in one of the richest zip codes in Los Angeles. So there's always a strong reaction from citizens when some bureaucrat decides this or that neighborhood isn't diverse enough and tries to put low-income housing or a homeless shelter in next door. But the complaining may soon end because, according to the New York Times, several U.S. senators have introduced a bill that would ban local communities from getting in the way of any of this, of the massive social engineering projects that might affect them. At that point, if that happens, the federal government will be able to do whatever they want to your neighborhood. It's easier that way. Less democracy, less fuss. And you? Well, you can just be quiet, Mr. Bigoted Middle American. It's for diversity, so don't ask questions. Don Calloway is a former Missouri state representative, and he joins us tonight. Don, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker. Happy
look,
4th.
I think happy 4th. You got to look. There are people who need assistance with housing, and I'm not against it. And you got to put them somewhere. But it does. 2 points I would make. One, it seems totally unfair to tell homeowners they have no right to a voice in that discussion because it really affects neighborhoods. That's a real thing, and all the virtue signaling in the world can't cover that up. It's real. So how dare the U.S. Congress try and tell homeowners they can't veto projects that affect them?
Well, ultimately, Tucker, the Department of Housing and Urban Development is the one of our several agencies in the government, executive agencies that is, that has a per se mission and charter to integrate housing in this country, and is for the express written purpose in its charter of eradicating housing segregation. So that is one way to consider it, is by allowing mixed use and mixed income developments to be put in areas of the country that are not segregated to just simply the geographic areas that we've limited them to, which necessarily force poor people to live amongst themselves in poor communities.
Well, I'm a little confused.
Which is necessarily a segregation.
First of all, hold on, wait, slow down. The government is not forcing anyone to live anywhere. There's no law forcing anyone to live anywhere.
But we've incentivized.
But hold on, let me just say, this only seems to work one way. So I don't see, if integration is the goal of federal housing policy, I don't see the feds moving affluent white people into poor black neighborhoods. That's called gentrification, and we're against that. Aren't we against that? I thought we're supposed to be against that. All good liberals are. But it does work the other way? Tell me why that's a good idea.
I don't just run with the proposition that gentrification is necessarily a bad thing. It's revitalized urban agendas and urban neighborhoods throughout this country. But to the other question about it necessarily being about integration, that's not necessarily it. HUD has the charter of integrating housing as well as helping to eradicate poverty across the board. It is very hard to carry out a mission of poverty eradication if you're forcing people to live into necessarily segregated neighborhoods among themselves. Let's put the fair back in fair housing. Now, yes, neighborhoods should have something to do with that. But if we can show that, if you can make a showing that there would be positive value of a mixed income community, I think that's something that all neighborhoods should consider. Perhaps not be forced upon them. I haven't read the Senate bill that you've referenced. I'm not saying the government should force it on them. But neighborhoods should consider integrating.
Nobody is forcing anyone to, wait, slow down. No. What we're saying as a society is, if you can't afford housing, we'll pay for it. Tax dollars will pay for it. We're not forcing you to take it. There's no force involved here. Second, why is it fair for someone who's working really hard, maybe multiple jobs, to move his family into a safe neighborhood with good schools, and then part of his taxes are going to pay for someone else to live in that same neighborhood, potentially making it worse? Like, why is that fair? I don't understand.
Tucker, your assumption is based upon the idea that people who are living in subsidized housing or in poor neighborhoods are necessarily a bad element and would bring that element to other neighborhoods. There is substantial value to mixed income communities throughout this country, and we see that right here in D.C., where you and I live. We see it in St. Louis, my original hometown, and in many of the gentrified areas where you spoke about. We have people of varying incomes living in peace and harmony right next to each other, and we've all, as Americans of all political stripes and all race and gender stripes or any other demographics, have fundamentally declared war against the poor in this country. We continue to advocate these ideas that the poor people are poor because they're stupid or lazy or that they don't deserve anything better.
I'm never going to make... Stop with it. You're arguing a point that I haven't raised and don't believe. I don't think poor people are bad. I don't think everyone in public housing is bad. I don't think they're criminals. I'm not making any kind of generalization like that. But I'm looking at the numbers, and I'm reaching a database conclusion, which is if you have a large cluster of public housing units in your neighborhood, crime goes up, schools get worse. It's just true. It's not an attack on anybody. I feel sorry for people. I've had a lot of experience with this, and I'm not attacking those people. I'm just saying there's a cost. Let's stop lying about the cost.
Let's take it out of that. Then what is the problem with spreading out mixed and lower income housing developments, integrating them into communities which are not necessarily low income? Wouldn't that be better if they lived among people who were not necessarily low income? Wouldn't it be better if they had access to schools?
Better for whom?
If they had access to schools who were
better for whom?
Better for poor people and helping to lift them out of poverty, Tucker.
It might be. Hold on, slow down. It might be.
You're right. It might be. It would be great if we could lift them out of poverty.
What about the other people who live there?
You're assuming that living among poor people degrades the neighborhood, and it doesn't. Excuse me, degrades neighborhoods, and it doesn't.
There's no evidence at all. I'm making a date. Actually, you're wrong. You're wrong on this point.
Said it
and I'm not saying living among poor people degrades anybody. I'm just saying that the stats show really clearly if you have a big cluster of public housing, not just poor people, living in government-subsidized housing, there's a difference.
A big cluster. And what we're talking about in the Galleria in Houston, and what we're talking about throughout the country in urban redevelopment is the idea of mixed income. People of all income levels, people of all...
You can call it whatever you want,
who are not necessarily
but the bottom line
socioeconomically similarly situated living together.
Here's what bugs me. Right, I get it. I get the dream, and it's been a dream for 50 years, and I'm not opposed to that dream because I'm for integration. Unlike most people on the left, I'm very uncomfortable with historically black universities because they're not diverse. No, I'm serious. I'm for integration. So I'm not against that, but I am saying that the people who live there have a right to have a different view, and it doesn't make them bigots. So will you just concede as a final note that they're not... Of course they are. The fair housing people are, you're a bigot. You just don't like people who look different from you. That's
Tucker, I certainly haven't. You and I always have good discussions, and I haven't said that they're bigots. I'm saying that there is substantial value to potentially looking at mixed income communities around the country. And it's unfortunate that HUD has decided not to help further that mission.
Hasn't worked very well. And Don, thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Tucker.
Up next, a new poll shows that those on the political left are far less likely to say they are proud of the country they live in. Is America becoming more anti-American because of that? We'll discuss with Charles Krauthammer next. It's time for tonight's reality check. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is back in the news tonight after being caught sitting on the beach with his family. Now, ordinarily, it wouldn't be a big deal, but these are not ordinary times in the state of New Jersey. Thanks to a budget standoff in the legislature, that state's government has shut down. And that means that public parks and beaches are shut down too because, for reasons that nobody ever explains, you apparently need government supervision to go outside. That's the way it works. So on the busiest holiday weekend of the summer, nobody can go to the beach except Chris Christie. He went to his state-owned retreat at Island Beach State Park. Yesterday, a helicopter took pictures of the governor and his family sunbathing on the otherwise deserted shore. Pretty nice. Busted. Christie immediately became a star on social media, and not in a good way. Even his own lieutenant governor denounced him. Christie himself compounded the problem by trying to claim it never happened.
I didn't get any sun today.
My question is this. Are there lifeguards at the...
No. No, there's no one at Island Beach State Park. There are no lifeguards. There's no one to pick up the garbage. There's no one providing any services at Island Beach State Park.
Didn't get any sun. Now, who are you going to believe, the governor of New Jersey or your own lion eyes? Christie's PR team explained their boss actually didn't get any sun, despite sitting on the beach during a perfect day, the peak of summer, because he was wearing a baseball hat. Because that's what people mean if they ask you, did you get any sun? Whether rays were falling directly on the top of your head. Not a huge scandal, but perhaps an example of what people mean when they say there is one standard for the powerful and another for everybody else. And yet Christie didn't seem to get that. Rather than simply apologize and let it pass, he ridiculed anyone annoyed that he would exempt himself from the rules. He said it was his privilege to do that. Look, if you want to go to the beach when nobody else is allowed to go to the beach, go ahead and get elected governor. Meanwhile, be quiet. He's at 15% in the approval ratings as of tonight. And today, Christie immediately, as we said, blew up on social media. Here are some of the highlights for you. There he is in a beach chair during a bill signing. Pretty impressive, right? In the Oval Office. Here he is building the RCA building at Rockefeller Plaza during the 1930s. There he is having a sandwich on an I-beam. And my favorite, here he is in front of the famous Sopranos meat store, tucking in. The United is great sometimes. Well, a Fox News poll conducted last week finds a chasm between left and right in how they view this country. Overall, according to the poll, 51% of Americans are proud to be Americans, 45% are not. That's a huge drop from June of 2011, when 69% of people said they were proud of America and only 28% were not proud. But the partisan gap is enormous in this poll. 64% of Republicans say they're proud of America. Compare that to just 39% of Democrats. Charles Krauthammer is a writer and columnist, and he joins us now. Charles, on the eve of the 4th of July, 39% of Democrats proud of the country. That's a profound number. Can it be true?
Yeah, I think it is true. Probably a lot of that, or at least part of it, has to do with Trump. They feel he's not a good representative of the country. They're upset by the tweets, by lots of other stuff, and that probably colors that. But what strikes me is the fact that we have remarkably high numbers overall. Forget about ideology or party affiliation. And that, to me, is very disturbing. And I think it has to do with the fact that we teach our children about all the pathologies of the United States and very little of the glories. Anybody with a child having gone through the schools in the last decade would know that. And it's really abnormal, anti-American, and destructive.
Why would the rest of us tolerate that? I mean, this is not a new thing. I know you send a child through school. I have too. This has been going on an awful long time. They come home, they tell you about all the sins of the country, totally out of proportion to their relative weight. And the rest of us kind of sit back and pay the tuition and sort of let it happen. Why have we done that, I wonder?
Well, I think the left, starting in the 60s, the countercultural left, had a strategy, which is to take over the institutions. They weren't just out there rioting and sitting in. They went into the professions, the teaching professions, and they've essentially taken over. That generation of radicals runs the universities. They run the teachers' unions. They run the curricula. I was on the curriculum committee of my son's school, and I had to fight like crazy to get them to introduce European history. And that was called Eurocentric. I mean, my son could practically speak Inca by the time he got to 8th grade, but he didn't know a damn thing about France or Britain. So there is this prejudice. It is seeped through. And in the end, what brings civilizations down is when the elites lose confidence in the rightness of their cause. And when that happens, the rest is just commentary.
It certainly tanked the British Empire. I mean, that's exactly how their command of the world collapsed. I'm not sure anyone was better for it in the end. How do you write it, or is it too far along?
It's very far along. In the end, the writing it means that we need a new generation of teachers who are not committed to this patho-history, history of the sins of our ancestors. Look, every civilization is founded on sins, every single one. Dispossession, violence, appropriation. What distinguishes civilizations are the ones who rise above it. Yes, the West had slavery, but so did practically every other civilization. What is unique about ours, about the British Empire, is it decided to outlaw slavery and to enforce it using the British Navy. That's new, that's unique, but you don't hear that story.
No, you don't, because they're liars. Charles, thank you very much. That was great, and
My
happy
pleasure.
Thank you. Well, a clergyman in Texas is furious at the prospect of enforcing American immigration law. So furious, in fact, he was arrested while protesting a sanctuary city crackdown. That pastor will be here next. Plus, Anna Koyman comes to the friend zone. She'll be in North Carolina. She's celebrating the 4th with other proud Americans. She's certainly one of them. There she is. Well, a pastor in Texas is training members of his congregation to form a human shield against the enforcement of some American immigration laws. Jim Rigby is the pastor at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Austin, Texas. In May, he was arrested for trespassing while protesting a Texas state law that cracks down on sanctuary cities. He's also made his church literally a sanctuary, welcoming illegal immigrants from Guatemala and telling congregants to lock the doors if ICE comes knocking. Pastor Rigby joins us tonight. Pastor, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. So,
thank you for inviting me.
Because you're wearing a clerical collar and you are invoking your religion, the world's largest religion, to throw moral weight behind your argument, I think it's fair to ask what exactly your argument is. Who has a moral right, to come to the United States?
Well, we are a sanctuary church. In our church, we have 2 people from Guatemala. I think particularly, do you remember the Colin Powell's Pottery Barn rule? I mean, for me, what gets left out of the conversation a lot is that this young mother and her son were born into a country that had been destabilized. And as an American, I feel like I'm partially responsible for that, to give her sanctuary.
So Guatemala had a coup in 1954. It was backed by the United States. I think that's probably what you're referring to.
Well,
a few than 10 years earlier, A whole series. But I mean, I don't know, Germany and Japan, we in effect orchestrated coups in those countries less than 10 years before. They don't have sky-high murder rates. I don't exactly understand. You're saying that Guatemala is a mess because of U.S. involvement. The U.S. had much more involvement in Germany and Japan. Those are not a mess. How exactly can you prove that Guatemala's pathologies, which seem to go back 1,000 years, are the result of U.S. foreign policy and therefore blood on our hands?
Well, I'm just a Presbyterian minister in Austin, Texas, and I had a family come and ask for sanctuary. Our church is a democracy, so we all voted on that. And because I knew the story down there, I didn't feel her story started when she got to our boundary. I mean, I'm not a political scientist, but I did not feel like, as a Christian, that I could close the door under those terms.
Right. Well, I mean, I respect that in some ways. I mean, you seem like a compassionate person, and so I admire that in you. But there are bigger implications here because you are violating the law and encouraging others to do the same. And so it raises the obvious question, which I asked you a minute ago, and I'm going to press you on it if you don't mind. Who has a right to come here? People you feel compassion for? Or what's the rule that other Christians like me should abide by? Who's got that right, that moral right?
Well, I mean, obviously it's a personal, a lot of Christians are going to disagree with me on this. I would say when people are in harm's way, this mother was born, as I say, in Guatemala. It was too dangerous for her there, so she fled. And this is not just one person, these are lots of stories. Flees into Mexico, and she's an indigenous person. She's not Mexican. She's Mayan. So she stands out like a sore thumb, and the mob starts going after her. So all of a sudden, she's got to choose between throwing herself on the mercy of the United States or possibly having her child kidnapped or killed. So there are millions of stories like that. And I realize there are other, this is a complicated issue. I understand that. And I'm not trying to vilify somebody who disagrees. I was in a crisis of conscience.
But it doesn't seem like that. I mean, I understand that, and I'm actually much more sympathetic to you than I thought I would be, because you do seem like you're moved by compassion. But you're also attacking a system that was decided by the United States Congress. The people's representatives voted this into law, and you're saying all of these laws should be ignored. I'm giving the finger to federal agents. We should blow them off. And I just want to know, like, when as a Christian can I do that? When can I decide? Whenever I feel like it? Whenever my conscience is pricked? I mean, is it a sort of a buffet-style deal with the law? Like, whenever I'm in the mood to abide by it? Like, what are the rules?
Well, I think you obey laws whenever you can. But when you feel like a higher law is being a principle, Dr. King saying, when you feel the law is unjust and you can point to people that are being oppressed by it, then, I mean, for me, I just couldn't. The law enforcement people from the state, all over the state, gathered to argue against this. I do not believe the purpose of SB 4 in Texas being forced on Austin was to make Americans safer. Because if that's true, I don't think the sheriffs and the police from all over the state would have come and argued against it. They said we're safer by not having SB 4.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sorry. Police don't get to make the laws in this country. Lawmakers do. And I don't think you'd want to live in a country where police get to make the law, would you?
Well, if it's, you know, if it's between the Texas legislature.
If you agree with it, I guess that's your standard. If I agree with it, okay. Unfortunately, we're out of time. This is an interesting conversation, Pastor. I'm sorry. I'll let you sum it up in one sentence.
Well, I agree this needs to be something that you don't do lightly, and you need to be willing to pay the consequences, and that may be 6 months in jail. So I don't. Okay. I understand where you're coming from. I just couldn't do it.
Good. Well, look, if you're willing to pay the consequences and be a man and look it right in the face and say, I'll go to jail, then you know what? I'm not going to attack you. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
The 4th of July celebrates national unity, but an obsession with race and white privilege and all this stuff appears to be keeping this country divided in ways that are deep and maybe dangerous long term. Up next, we'll talk to the Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson, who's doing his best to move this country beyond all that. An update from him. Stay tuned.